Be sure to go to flipsidegaming.com and use promo code 6 for 10% off on orders over $10. Do the same at the Grizzly Gentleman. Both of them are fantastic deals and they help support the show. What is up, Planeswalkers? Theurx6 back with a bit of something different today. Today, as I said a while ago, I have been working on a Death and Taxes historic primer for quite some time. The issue is, I'm in grad school, and it's very hard for me to write as much as I want to write. So instead, I figured I would just say it. It's a little bit easier for me to do. So, this video is going to be the first in a several part series, several part series, there we go, I can speak human English, in which I essentially talk about Death and Taxes, but in video form. And we're going to start with today, which is an introduction, what is Death and Taxes, why you should play it, and then we're going to go through the 0 CMC and 1 CMC cards that have some sort of consideration in Death and Taxes. Then the next video is going to be probably just 2 CMC, then just 3 CMC. There's probably enough for just 4, and then we're going to do 5 plus CMC. And then we're going to start talking about various builds. We'll talk about various cores, we'll talk about builds, we'll talk about potential matchups, etc., etc. So, what is Death and Taxes? At the core of it, Death and Taxes is essentially a controlling deck. Some may say it's actually control, some might not, so I'm saying it's a controlling deck that utilizes creatures primarily. And what it aims to do is stop your opponents, or at least slow your opponents, from doing what they plan on doing in time enough for you to slowly whittle them down with your, frankly, puny creatures. The poster children for Death and Taxes include cards like Thalia, cards like Flickerwisp, not currently in Historic, cards like Lunan Arbiter, not currently in Historic, Stoneforge Mystic, not currently in Historic. A lot of these things, where we're getting some annoying value, maybe we have some Blink shenanigans, yada yada, and then we're going to hit people in the face with 2 power creatures that most frequently have 1 toughness. You should play D&D if you like playing control, but don't like casting a lot of non-creature spells. So if you really dislike discard, if you really dislike counter spells, you're not a fan of planeswalkers, but you still want to be a little mean to your opponent, I think Death and Taxes would be for you. If you enjoy essentially like being mean and forcing your opponent to play the game you want them to play, like, you can't cast this removal spell. I have a Thalia, End of Rin Wingmare. It costs you 2 additional. Haha. Get screwed. If you like to interact with your opponent, you should play Death and Taxes. There are plenty of kind of goldfish decks on Arena right now, even if they're not truly goldfish. They have some interaction. I'm looking at things like Ramp, even to an extent Goblins, cards that they just kind of want to do their own thing and not really pay attention to what you do at all. You can say no to those and play Death and Taxes, where everything you do really matters and interacts with your opponent. And then, of course, if you want to play a deck that's skill intensive, not only is it relatively difficult to pilot properly, the historic version, for what it's worth, is generally going to be more easy. But many of the versions of this deck on historic really need you to have an understanding of the metagame. Death and Taxes is definitely a meta-dependent deck, because its goal is to look at what the meta as a whole is doing and use the cards that are most frequently going to slow those types of decks down. Not necessarily just those decks, but even you have to have some considerations for the fringe decks, the things that people are sometimes playing. If we're looking at something like Historic, right, you want to make sure you're preparing for the Ramps, the Goblins, the Sacrifice decks. But lurking in the shadows over there is still the Shrine decks, right? There's still these mono black discard decks. You want to make sure you can still have game against those. So playing Death and Taxes, you definitely need to have a very rich understanding of the historic metagame, at least in the area you're in. I will say, I prefer to play best of 3 when I'm playing competitively, or when I'm trying, essentially. So most of these ideas are going to come from the perspective that you are playing best of 3 as well. You technically could make a Death and Taxes deck work in best of one. You have to change it. The meta is different. The way that the game actually like uses your deck algorithm or whatever, it's different. So if you don't like certain things, you're not going to want to play Death and Taxes. If you just want to play Solitaire, don't play Death and Taxes. If you're just planning on going like turn 1 Goblin into turn 2, 2 Goblins into turn 3 Muxus, hope you win, this is not the deck for you if you like that style of thing. If you want to draw a lot of cards, do not play Death and Taxes. We are primarily a white deck. Even in the color splashes, white is still going to be the primary because that's where most of the taxing comes from. White is not exactly known for drawing cards. So if you don't want to draw a lot of cards, don't play this deck. If you want to aggro your opponent down, this is not the deck for you. There can be hands and builds that are more aggressive than others, but even if this is not technically a control deck, which frankly I refer to it as a control deck, even if you don't consider this a control deck, it is still a controlling deck. The goal isn't to curve out and just beat your opponent to death. It's not what you want. And then if you want to just have a deck that you never have to change, this is also probably not the deck for you, because as the meta evolves, you're going to want to continuously make slight changes here and there to make sure your deck is getting as best out of the card pool as it can, based on, of course, what it's seeing. So, as I've said, this video series will go over all of the cards that I have considered even worth discussing in a Death and Taxes context, in Historic, in Best of 3. I will try my best to make notes of things as they come, but I might miss something. And if I miss something, definitely be sure to comment that down in the comments, and I will address it in the following video. So if you think that I missed a card that costs 0 CMC or 1 CMC, let me know in the comments, and I will address it at the beginning of tomorrow's 2 CMC video. And yes, I'll be doing these daily alongside my Mythic Bolas climb. So you're getting double dose of Justin. So we'll start off with Pack Navigation, and you might be wondering like why I'm looking over here. I have written information down about the 0 CMC and the 1 CMC cards, so I am going to use that in this specific instance, but I'm not going to necessarily go through it. Pact of Negation seems like a weird thing to talk about in terms of Death and Taxes, but I do want to be as comprehensive as possible. And in Pact of Negation, technically, you could play in some sort of Death and Taxes deck. If you're in a meta, and you're already in the Azorius version, and you're playing like nothing but combo decks that also have a lot of creature removal, this might be worth playing. Not very likely though. It would be incredibly unlikely to do so. Stonecoil Serpent can fit well in any of the Death and Taxes versions. I'll reference versions here and there. If I'm speaking generally, they're like mono white, white blue, white black, white red, white green. Technically speaking, you can do 3 color combinations as well. The most prominent that I can think of are the Bant version because of the ETB synergy across both of those, and the Mardu version because both of those can combine to be a little bit more of an aggressive or like slowly draining style deck. But generally speaking, the versions are those main 5. This can go in any of those, and it's a relatively nice card because it allows you to put it anywhere on the curve. It's something where if you do happen to flood out, which can be a problem in these styles of decks, you'll have just a really large thing to play. It doesn't do any taxing, but it is pretty nice because of the fact that it has reach, trample, and protection from multicolored. It means that it's difficult to remove, can block things really nicely, and can attack through things really nicely. That said, deck space is very tight. Torment's Crypt seems great, and it fits in every version. The issue is we have Rest in Peace and Grafdigger's Cage, and those cards just do things better. Torment's Crypt, you can have it out and have this looming threat. However, once you use it, it's gone, and if your opponent, restocks up or whatever, then your Crypt is useless. Rest in Peace is just it comes down, immediately wipes it out, and it sticks around and continues to work. Obviously, Rest in Peace can be removed, But at that point, you're kind of just saying, well, Tormod's Crypt could be removed. But Rest in Peace still gets rid of things until it gets removed, right? So, and then of course, Grafdigger's Cage, it doesn't actually get rid of the cards, but Cage does come with some other benefits, dealing with things entering from the library. So that's why I consider Tormod's Crypt to be one of the weaker versions of Graveyard Hate for the sideboard, but I think this is fine. I'll try to reference when it's sideboard. So those are the only 0 CMC cards that I consider. There could be others, but this is fine. Ailsid of Life's Bounty is our mother/giver of runes. You do have to spend mana to use it, but I mean, there's no but. You have to spend mana to use it. I guess technically the but is that it doesn't have to tap to use its ability, which means that you can play it and immediately hold it up, whereas with Mother of Runes and Giver of Runes, they have to stick around because it's a tap ability. So I guess that is something. This does have lifelink, which means that you can actually benefit from this thing being in combat, whereas with Mother and Giver runes, you really just want them to stay out of the red zone as long as possible. But if your opponent is not has no blockers, you can just attack with this and get some incremental life gain, as well as some incremental death part of your taxes. With the other two, obviously, you can't tap. You can't attack because then you can't tap them. So Ailsid is relatively nice. It's, in my opinion, the best of the one-drop protection creatures, and we'll get to more later. But the main reason for that is the fact that giving protection in most scenarios that I've come across playing this deck is more valuable than giving indestructible. One of the main benefits of protection over indestructibility is the fact that you can push through for lethal, and not deal with targeted exile. Obviously, target destruction is going to operate the same. But generally speaking, the fact that you can say, hey, you only have green creatures, I'm going to give this creature protection from green and attack you, I find that very valuable. So, Then we have Cloud Shift. Cloud Shift is a bit of a strange one. We currently don't have a ton of super great ETB creatures. We have plenty that are okay. More so in non-pure white. The Selesnya version has a decent amount. The Azorius version has a decent amount. I mean, honestly, you could even find that in a lot the black as well. Red, not so much. But those ones tend to have a little bit more ETB stuff. But we don't have things like Flicker Wisp, where we're going to want to get that at instant speed. We don't have... what is your name? What is your name? Blade Splicer. That allows us to get cool instant speed things. What is nice about Cloud Shift, for what it's worth, besides, of course, being able to reuse ETBs, is that it can blank some forms of removal. It's a fast flicker, so that means it enters as soon, like, as part of the resolution. Slow flickers wait until the end of turn. So it does mean that you can't dodge board wipes, but you can still dodge target removal. You can block something and then before damage flicker it out so that your creature isn't actually killed. So there is some nice value here, but unless you're playing a dedicated like ATB version, I don't think it's worth playing. And currently, I don't think there is a good dedicated ATB version. Dauntless Bodyguard is fine, but it's not better than the Doggo. The Doggo can protect anything at any time, whereas Dauntless Bodyguard has to come down after the creature you want to protect, and it can only protect that creature. Yes, it does have an additional point of power, but as I said, we're not playing an aggressive deck. We're not trying to kill our opponent as quickly as possible. Let me rephrase, because we are trying to kill our opponent as quickly as we can, but our goal is not to just beat face. So that one extra point of power isn't the end-all be-all. The main issue with Dauntless Bodyguard is the fact that it has to come down after the creature, and you can only protect one. In Death and Taxes, you're going to find that it's many of your creatures working in tandem, which makes the deck strong. So, you know, having a Thalia and a, let's say, what is your name? a meddling mage, let's say we have a Thalia and a meddling mage, we can only choose to protect one with Dauntless Bodyguard. But if we have Thalia, Meddling Mage, and Doggo, I can't remember. We'll get to it near the end because this is in alphabetical order. That can threaten to protect both, right? So we have Dauntless Bodyguard protecting Thalia. Okay, they just kill our Meddling Mage, or vice versa. When we have Doggo out, they go to kill one of them. We get to choose, is this worth saving at that moment, and then we can potentially blank the removal. So if you were playing a knight version, or you prefer to have a slightly more aggressive slant to your death and taxes, or the metagame requires you to be a little bit more aggressive, then this card is gonna be good for you. Deafening Silence. Multiple spell combo decks don't really seem to be very prevalent right now. Even if they were, I feel like with the degeneracy of creatures nowadays, creatures would be the main way this occurs. Right now, honestly, it's like lands. Like if this were just like only one land can enter the battlefield per player per turn, like this would actually probably be very playable. But as it is, I just don't think that the metagame calls for it. If you're in a situation where there is a variety of multiple, even then, honestly, this is almost certainly not even going to need this. I would rather have something along the lines of like Aether's One Canonist, but we don't have that. Fight is 1, so this can give your cards indestructible. It also gives them a boost, which is nice. It means that you can potentially attack in for lethal. It allows you to trade more efficiently. We do have a mixture of humans and non-humans in the deck. The main issue, though, is that it's a spell. We want to play as few non-creatures as possible because we're playing cards like Thalia, potentially cards like Vryn Wingmare, that make it cost more for us to cast cards, to cast non-creatures. It's great, but in situations where you have those out, you have to be holding up 2 mana consistently, and I'm just not sure it's worth the slot for protection when we have creatures that can do similar things. Giant Killer Chop Down. Right now, Historic Death and Taxes' biggest weakness is a lack of actual like good removal. For what it's worth, that's Magic's like current issue, is lack of any good removal. Threats are too good. Removal is garbage right now. Giant Killer can help you deal with some pesky large creatures, and having a Ballynock Trapper type card, type effect, I think I'm saying that right, can also like help you out throughout the game. The issue, of course, is that Chop Down does cost 3. It is an instant, but we generally don't really have a ton of space for this card, I've found. But if you're just getting hit a lot with Yorvo or Questing Beast or dragons of some sort, then this is fine. This is a meta choice, but this being 4 or higher does mean that it's a little harder to kill. I would really like to see, man, I don't even know. Angelic Ascension is like the closest thing, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. But Angelic Ascension is like the closest thing, and it's not good. Like, it's the closest thing to like Path to Exile, Swords of Plowshares type thing. And I understand those cards are too strong, but we need something better, and it ain't this. God's Willing. Essentially, what I said about the other things, it suffers from the Thalia attacks, and it's not a creature. I guess one of the other things to think about, which we'll talk more about with Militia Bugler on the 3rd episode, is that this can't be gotten with Militia Bugler. This can't be retrieved with Collected Company, right? There are so many different reasons why we want to be playing protection that are also creatures. Obviously, it sucks sometimes because it means that we can, we lose out against certain types of wraths and things like that. But generally speaking, even though we have the Scry here, the fact that it's a not creature means it's not as good. Hazda Marshall. What part of I'm a controlling deck don't you understand? And you might be saying, like, why am I actually like bringing this up if this, I'm just going to say this is a bad card, don't play it. Because you could, if you wanted to, play a white weenie deck that happens to have tax elements. You can play aggro decks that happen to have taxing cards. Things like Mardu Humans in Historic right now, that uses things like Thalia, that uses cards like General Kudro. Those are not Death and Taxes decks, but they are decks that have some taxing effects in order to help their aggressive game plan along. And if you prefer that style of deck, you could theoretically make use of Hazda Marshal. Theoretically, I don't think Hazda Marshal is very good regardless. Ishimaru. There was a time when this card was really strong. That time is not right now. Isolate. This is funny, Wizards. Who needs this card? Like, seriously. Maybe if this was like CMC 2 or less? Even, well, 2 or less, that might actually like see vintage play. If it was CMC 1 or 2, maybe? I don't know. This card is just kind of an actual disgrace. There are not enough 1 CMC cards to warrant this in like any sideboard. If somehow the meta becomes like this degenerate playing field of a bunch of 1-drops, then I could understand playing this. But Wizards, this is smacking us in the face, and it's rude. Legion's Landing. You could argue that this is the same as Hazda Marshal, but the difference here is that this technically is a creature. It's not actually. It's still gonna get cost the Thalia tax. It's still gonna not get captured by a collected company and things like that. But this comes with a creature that happens to have lifelink, and it can turn into a land that is actually very helpful, right? This card we wouldn't play for this. We would play it for this. Now, attacking with 3 creatures is potentially difficult. We do tend to run a lot of flyers, so it's not never going to happen. But being able to flip this so that against control, you can make a constant stream of threats, or against aggro, you can make a constant stream of blockers that gain life, is very helpful. I've yet to be able to find a place for it in the majority of my builds, which will be like the last video. But this is definitely a card that you should and could consider in a number of versions. My case of Lunarch is interesting. I like the flexibility of this card, but it feels a little bit too win more. If you top deck, very similar to Stonecoil Serpent, this is very strong. But generally speaking, it's slow at what it does. That's about it. It's slow at what it does. Resolute Watchdog takes like the worst parts of Sacrifice Doggo and Aelcid and puts it all into one Garbo package. Selfless Savior, the actual good doggo. This card, you sack it. Another creature you control gets indestructible. Bada bing, bada boom. There is something that you need to make note of. This says another target, and that can matter. If your opponent is playing something like a Vraska's Contempt, for example, where there's a secondary effect, they're going to gain some life. If you don't have another creature and they target your Selfless Savior, you can't sacrifice it to nothing. For what it's worth, I think that might be the same with Aelcid. Target creature. No, so you can technically... Not actually, that still might not work because you have to sacrifice. I don't know. Regardless, they are something to take note of for at least one of these cards. But yes, these are both good. I tend to play 3 and 3 of each of them in the mono white version and differ it based on the specific build I'm going for in the splash versions. But this is just. It just does what it needs to do. It protects your creatures. It makes it so that you can play into board wipes a little bit more. It's just nice. Then we get into the next colors. I'm going to talk about all the colors, man. Excuse me. Benthic Biomancer. If you have a blue splash, you can mitigate some of the issues with mono white, which is we just don't draw a lot. This card, unfortunately, though, triggers on getting counters placed on it. The blue splash doesn't place a lot of counters. The green splash can. The blue splash doesn't really. So this card, not the best. Dive Down. I would rather cast Aelcid. Once again, these protection spells are very nice. They're great at what they do. The issue is, and always will be, this is not a creature, so it cannot be retrieved with a number of things, and it costs more. Essence Flux. Very similar to Cloud Shift, except you have some potential bonus from spirits. I don't think there are currently any spirits. Well, there's like Kira. There are some spirits in the Azorius version that you could get benefits from this, but generally speaking, if you're not playing Cloud Shift, you're not playing this, and usually if you're looking for an effect, you're most likely going to find it in the primary color, so white, or you prefer to have it in the primary color, just because it's a little bit better on your mana base. Mistcaller. If a non-creature token would enter the battlefield and it wasn't cast, exile it instead. This is similar to another card we'll be talking about in day 2, which is Containment Priest. This you have to sacrifice a creature. Containment Priest has Flash, but it's a 2-mana card. It isn't worded exactly the same. In fact, I'll go ahead and just Containment Priest, just so we can kind of compare the two. So if a non-token creature would enter the battlefield and it wasn't cast, exile instead. No, it's exactly the same. So they do similar things. The issue is, I believe, Escape is a cast, so it doesn't even affect cards like Uro. And of course, I have to scroll all the way down to Uro because I'm not smart. You may cast this card, yeah. So it doesn't even affect cards like Uro, which are like the main things. And Cat Oven, for me, is like nowhere to be found. Is Oven or Cat banned in Historic? I don't know. I also don't care. Mistcaller just doesn't do as much as it could in other metas. It could, but Siren Stormtamer is actually a reasonable choice instead of something like Elcid, because Elcid does give protection, but Siren Stormtamer straight up counters the spell. It also counters a spell that targets you. Countering or giving protection to an enchantment, not going to happen very often, because once again, our enchantments are hopefully going to be creatures, because we want to be playing mostly creatures. So having that protection doesn't matter. Being able to protect us from things like Settle the Wreckage, from being hit with Burn, for example, those are all reasons why Siren Stormtamer is pretty helpful in the Azorius Splash. That said, it is technically more difficult because it's a blue pip to activate. So you do have to be careful. Spectre Sailor. It has Flash. It draws cards. Wow. It's not the greatest, because, it is 4 mana and it doesn't do anything else. It's not a real taxing effect. It doesn't protect our other things. But it is something that you can play early. You can kind of chip away at your opponent. You can use it as a chump blocker if you have to. And then once you get later in the game, you can use it as a way to draw cards and mitigate the weaknesses of this deck. Moving on to black, we first see Cling to Dust. It is an instant, and it does deal with the graveyard, but we have other ways to do things, but this does give us different benefits, and it does give us potential draw in the late game multiple times. The issue is we have to make sure we're holding up mana to do so. We have to get it benefit later on. We have to make sure that we have the cards in the graveyard. So just generally speaking, we have better ways to deal with graveyard hate, even though I do love this card. Deadweight. It is removal. It's technically decent removal. And it works with another card that we're going to come to soon. If you're playing a Hateful Eidolon package, then this card is phenomenal. And you can play a Death and Taxes deck that has a Hateful Eidolon package. If you're doing that, this card's great. If you're not, in the black deck, I tend not to play this. There are other cards that I would prefer to have. This figure goes into fewer decks, to be honest. This is worth more consideration because it does have a version that can be utilized. This one, less so. So, this card, not as good. Duress. It is... It's not a bad sideboard card if you want it, but Thoughtseize has been printed, so you're better off just using Thoughtseize if you really need a sideboard discard spell. For what it's worth, sometimes you need a sideboard discard spell. Sometimes you're playing a white-black version of Death and Taxes that happens to have a decent amount of discard. There are different versions of the deck. Erebos Intervention, I like this card in control decks, but this doesn't really fit what we want to do. We have better graveyard removal, and probably just better normal removal. It's nice that it's flexible, but generally speaking, not really what we're looking for. Foulmire Knight is kind of interesting. As I said before, for Dauntless Knight, you possibly can do some sort of Knight Death and Taxes thing. Death Knight and Taxes, maybe. What would it be? It'd be Death Knight and Fealty? Or Tithes? Whatever. This is nice. It's a 1-mana, 1/1 Death Touch, so it can just hold the tide against larger decks, and you can use it to draw a card. It does compete with other things we have in the 1-drop slot, but if you're trying to do some sort of hybrid Death and Taxes and Knights, then this has an okay consideration. You might be saying, like, I'm just kind of talking about random cards. Yeah, this is why I haven't gotten done. I'm talking about as many cards as I think are reasonable to mention in Death and Taxes, because I want to be as thorough as possible. Moving on, Gutter Bones. It's an aggressive card, which you can use if you want to go that route. It's nice that it keeps coming back, like you can keep getting it back, and since we're playing Death and Taxes, we're often not going to have cards in our hand. The issue is that we're not an aggro deck. You can do that if you want, but it doesn't really do much for me. Hateful Eidolon has lifelink. It's a 1/2. You can draw cards for doing aura things. This version I haven't fully fleshed out. I'm still working out the kinks on, because you still generally want to be playing Thalia, but Thalia does kind of mess with the auras that you want to be using. If we had the bestow mechanic, it'd be a little bit better, because that means we could get more value out of it. But you can have a Eidolon package and it'd be nice and work really nicely as removal for an Orzhov Death and Taxes deck. You should only play it with a package. Knight of the Ebon Legion. Technically, this can be an aggressive card, but it's also just like a nice ground deterrent, very similar to Foulmire Knight, where you can just sit here and be like, attack me, do it. Oh, they didn't attack? I'll flash in Aven Mind Center or something, right? So it's quite nice, and you can, like as I said, with something like Aven Mind Center, which has flying as well as flash, you can just keep this kind of on defense while it slowly grows from your creatures attacking in the air. You could... If you're running Orzhov, and you're not running the like 1-drop protection creatures, this is my choice for a 1-drop. It doesn't do a lot of taxing, other than just stopping your opponent from attacking. Hey, Thoughtseize, if you need discard that's targeted in your sideboard, this is a card to get. That's it. I mean, that's pretty much it. Village Rites. If you think your creature is going to die, like, you can cast this for value. There's a black version that I haven't gotten to work, which is the Aristocrat sub-theme. So it's a normal Death and Taxes shell, but it just runs a few cards that make it beneficial for your creatures to die. That type of deck would be best in an environment with a lot of control that run board wipes. Counterspell control is not as good in... But if your opponents, if the meta is playing a lot of board wipes, then that version theoretically would do really well. But I haven't gotten that deck to work yet, and I think it's just the meta game. Technically speaking, this would be nice, but outside of that, I don't think this card's worth running. Alpine Moon. You can only choose one card name. It's not good. For what it's worth, the Red Splash has potential for land destruction / land hate. This card, though, it's not good. Banefire. It's similar to Erebos Intervention, but we're like never going to have the mana to use this. It's nice that it can't be countered, but we're never going to have the mana to use this. Fanatical Firebrand. Typically used in aggro decks, but the fact that it can ping something is not nothing. This would also potentially work nicely in a more ping-oriented red-white Taxes deck. So you'll have things like this. You'll have Harsh Mentor. You'll have that annoying dinosaur whose name I've forgotten. The 3-mana 3/3 dinosaur. Who cares? Some raptor or something. So decks like that can definitely use this and still be a Death and Tax Dizzy. Grim Lavamancer. This is actually something that is nice, because this works 2 roles, right? This is actually a good example of a card that's sneakily a Death and Taxes card. This card is Graveyard Hate. I messed that up. What the card was I thinking of? I think I was thinking of something else. Regardless, this card's not Graveyard Hate. It hits your own graveyard, but it deals 2 damage to anything. I don't edit my videos. Can you tell? Grim Lavamancer is decent because it gives the deck reach, right? If you're in a situation where your opponent has used up a lot of resources to kill all your creatures and stuff, and you have access to this, you can just use it and kill things. I was about to say, is there any old art of? Man, they really like this version of Grim Lavamancer. Moving on from my faux pas. Flexion Intruder. It can destroy an artifact or enchantment, but the green splash has better ways of doing that. Knight of Autumn. Also, this has to connect in order to do that. It's a 1/2. It's nice that it has the flexibility of the welcome home part, but not great otherwise. Gilded Goose. This card gives us ramp. We do not need ramp. What are we ramping to? See Gilded Goose. Shaper Sanctuary. I want to like this card. And if your opponent's playing a lot of single target removal, and they're aiming it at your creature, so if they're playing burn, you still don't want to bring this in. Even if they do end up killing your creatures, you would rather just have more creatures. Your opponent's never going to have you use this. Aether Spellbomb. It can bounce things, and it can draw cards. It's okay. It has some utility in the blue splash, because you can bounce your own things. You can protect your own things, blah, blah, blah. But right now, it doesn't really have a spot. It's not a creature, and it doesn't really draw a card. It replaces itself. It has utility, but just not really great. Pattern of Renewal. If you need heals, we're playing white. We have plenty of heals. You don't need this card. Sure, you can sacrifice to draw another card, but this is not a creature. We have creatures that can heal us. We don't need this. Ginger Brute. See, this is different, because this card, once again, seems incredibly like an aggro card. For what it's worth, this is a consistent ping on your opponent, and you can hash it in to gain life. That said, the other cards at 1 are better, and unless you find a way to make Tempered Steel Death and Taxes, I don't think that this is necessary. And for what it's worth, we don't have Aethersworn Canonist, and without Aethersworn Canonist, at bare minimum, I'm not going to be making Tempered Steel Death and Taxes. So, Grafdigger's Cage. This is essentially just the card that you place with Rest in Peace. They just go hand in hand. They do what you want to have your opponents not get value out of your graveyard. It's fantastic. Not too much to say. They also can't get things from libraries, which is quite nice. Scrabbling Claws. It's similar to Relic of Progenitus, which is not in Historic. The reason Relic is better, though, is that it gets rid of everything when it's cracked. So essentially the only difference is, this would say, sacrifice Relic of Progenitus, exile all cards from all graveyards. We don't use our graveyard, really, so we don't need... it to be not hitting our graveyard. But the fact that it doesn't is kind of not great. It is consistent use, so you can, if you get it early, you can keep using it and still have that ability to crack it late game. But I just prefer to have consistent graveyard hate. Shadow Spear. Many versions of Death and Taxes, in fact, I think all versions of Death and Taxes that aren't Historic right now, get some value out of Stoneforge Mystic and swords of some kind. Either you'll see Jittes in the Legacy, you'll see Sword of Fire and Ice typically, as well as Batterskull in the modern version. I don't know about Pioneer. No idea if there's even Death Taxes in Pioneer, because I don't think it has Innistrad, so it doesn't have Thalia. This card is good. It's not a creature, but that's fine. I have not really used this all that much because we don't have a dedicated package, but this card is potentially worth the slot regardless. Making it so your opponent's permanents lose Hexproof for Indestructible doesn't really matter. It just makes your creatures a little bit bigger and gains you life. And when you're trying to wheel down your opponent, that can be very helpful. It's also just inexpensive. Silent Gravestone. It stops graveyard targeting, which is nice. There are certain things I think that care about this, but there's not a lot of that right now. Not a lot of graveyard targeting, and we would rather just yeet the graveyard completely with Rest in Peace. Soul Guide Lantern. The fact that you have to choose between one of these means it's just like, it's a worse Relic of Prius. You can play it and then you can play it, exile one of the cards, and then immediately crack it to exile their whole graveyard, but then it's gone, just like Tormod's Crypt. Like I would rather have Tormod's Crypt over this, just because of the fact that Tormod's Crypt is free, which means with Thalia it costs 1, right? So then we'll get to the 2 Zendikar Rising cards that I considered for Death and Taxes. The reason they're at the end is because they're not on my main list, because it is taking me too long. Kitesail Cleric is a good old 1-mana 1/1 flyer, which just generally speaking isn't the best, but you can get it with things like Collected Company, not the great with Collected Company, but still, and you can get it with Militia Bugler. And if you get it with Bugler, or you just cast it to kick it, you get to tap 2 creatures, which can allow you to hit lethal, right? If your opponent is just being annoying and they have a Nissa out and they have 2 annoying Nissa lands that keep threatening you, and you can't attack in with your Thalia and your Tithe Taker, you can just play this, tap down their 2 lands, and hit them, right? So there's some value out of this. I don't find it seeing actual play. Bloodchief's Thirst is good removal in black. It's not the best, obviously, because it doesn't exile, and it does have a limited range, at least for 1 mana. For 4 mana, you can get rid of anything. So that the fact that it's modular does help it with the whole Thalia consideration. But it's no path to exile, right? It's no path to exile. Whatevs. I think like Isolate is the art I'm going to use for this video. So yeah, that's the first part of this video. As I said at the top, let me know if you think I missed any cards. If I did, I'll address them at the beginning of the next episode. The next episode is going to be long as hell. There are a lot of 2-drops. Yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this. I'll thank my lovely patrons, especially Fogwind, for your continued support. If you'd like to join them and support the show, you'll find links in the description below. If you did enjoy this video, please like, comment, subscribe. I plan on having all of these finished, and then hopefully soon afterward I'll have the physical written up version. Although honestly, I might just like commission someone to take my thoughts from these videos and write them down, because I'm too fucking lazy. I'm not lazy, I'm just busy, dude. I don't know what I'm saying. Anyway, like and subscribe. Until next one, I'll be one.